There he is.
Hey, hey. Happy New Year.
Yeah. Happy New Year to you too, man.
Who do you have there?
Well, this is Lizzie. She's a part hairless, I think, mixed breed rescue from California.
Wow.
Yeah. So she's
Very cool.
she's looking out the window for her mom because they say dogs have one owner, and it's not me.
Mm-hmm.
But she's lovely, right? So she's looking for her mom.
There you go. And it's a rescue from like a shelter in California kind of thing, like a bad situation, not from California itself.
I don't get the question.
No. Like when you say a rescue dog, it's because the dog was in like an animal shelter because the dog was like maltreated by an owner and stuff. That's what I'm assuming, right?
Yeah, I think there's just an overpopulation of dogs in general, and culturally in California, you kind of get a dog and it just runs around the neighborhood, sort of thing, and then all of a sudden, the females are pregnant, and so it's a bit of a problem. And I think in our culture, at least, we treat animals kind of like family members, and so. Yeah, we're lucky to have her.
Certainly dogs and cats, not chickens and cows and stuff. We treat those like something else. So,
yeah. So
did I ever tell you about this Toronto vegetarian? They put ads on the TTC trying to suggest to people that chickens are kind of like cats, and dogs are similar to pigs, because chickens have families or whatever it is, and pigs are intelligent. And as a result of watching this, it was supposed to suggest you shouldn't eat chickens and pigs. And of course, being the idiot that I am, I took away from this why don't we eat dogs and cats?
Okay, yeah.
Right? Because they sort of equated the things similar. I'm like, why do we love one and eat the other? And I'm not the sort of person who enjoys animals as pets. So my mind went to that terrible place where it's why don't we eat
I think our viewership numbers just went down.
Yeah, there you go. But I think the lesson in that is when you go and you put something out there and you put it in the Toronto Transit Commission, you put ads on the TEC suggesting something, and you ask a question you might want to consider what would happen if you took this question seriously and not as a rhetorical device to say, oh, you shouldn't eat chickens. If I was to take it seriously, I don't know what a chicken, if I came from outer space and I didn't know what a chicken was and I didn't know what a cat was, and I'd be like, I don't know, why do you eat one and not the other? I don't get it. What's the answer here? Well, so embrace stupidity. There you go. See, I brought it full circle.
I love the have you've thought about this idea of the viewer from outer space, right? I think that's hilarious. I do that. I remember Christopher Hitchens used to do that a few times, right? And writers can almost write from that really omniscient sort of simpleton, stupid sort of hey, what what really are we looking at here, right? So I
like how you use the word simple and stupid and omniscient in there. Omniscient means all knowing, right?
Yeah.
So it's the opposite of all, nothing knowing. We need omniscience. What's language? How do you say nothing? None. Nil.
No.
Nullicient.
Nullicient. Yes. Nullicient.
Nullicient. That's what we need a group of. Yes, exactly. Yeah, Nutella. Exactly. Just like that. So we need a group of people like that, just idiots, professional idiots. It should be something you need to be a credential for, right? Obviously, you're into education, so credentialing idiots was probably a good idea, and then you become a professional idiot. You show up and you just ask stupid questions, and it's okay to do so because it's like the jester, right? You can show up and point out the dumb things that are going on, and people are like, oh, it's okay. He's a professional idiot. He's allowed to ask dumb questions. The rest of you, though, you have to pretend like you're smart. What do you think? Do we have something? Can we make $1 million off this?
We do. We're the reincarnation of Candide, or of Voltaire, in his story of Candide, or like I've tried to equate Forrest Gump, right? I mean, it's that simpleton, like, just down to the basics. Like, why do we overanalyze everything? We can like back ourselves into the corners, and
yes. The Forrest Gump Yoda connection: do or do not, there is no try. Like that sort of like, just go and do stuff, or don't. My mama always said life is like a box of chocolates.
Yeah.
But I don't know what he meant by that. Like, it's good. They like, you never know what you're going to get inside them. You have to pay a couple bucks. It's the sort of gift you get someone at Christmas, but you don't know what to get them. Like, I guess that was part of it, though. It's kind of like, if you look at religious texts, they don't really spell out what they're talking about really clearly. And you have all these paradoxes. It's like, there's this one about like, don't worry about today kind of thing. The Lord will take care of it, and something about birds and stuff like that. Like, don't, I think I'm getting them mixed up, but there's one about like, don't worry about, like, the birds don't worry too much about where their food's coming from, so you shouldn't either. And then somewhere else in the Bible, it's like, as you sow, shall also shall you reap, which is like, well, maybe you ought to think about planting stuff, and like actually like put the seeds in the ground and water them and stuff. Like, it's a paradox, right? It's like, how can you have a book that tells you these two things? But the point of it is like, it's actually like, that's the only way you can teach this sort of thing, is by going in and giving people stuff that doesn't make any sense. And then they're like, I don't get it. I don't understand. Life is so complicated and confusing. It's like, yeah, it is. Right? Like, it is complicated and confusing.
Yeah.
And that's why you need the simpleton to point out like what isn't so confusing. You probably shouldn't eat somebody's dog or their cat because they love them. Probably the reason we eat chickens and pigs is because people don't love them. And movies like Babe and I don't know, Chicken Run probably did something to help move the needle on vegetarianism, right? And maybe we just need more cute like chickens and pigs and stuff out there that are like, standing up for their rights. And like, I don't know, Animal Farm was about something other than the pigs, but it could be about the pigs.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, have you considered why intuitively? Now, you might be, genetically programmed a little differently, because you said you're not really, you don't gravitate towards being a like a domestic pet owner sort of thing. But if you think about how we perceive chipmunks or squirrels versus rats, right?
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Alvin, Simon, and Theodore are cute. Ratatouille, it was hard to like. Ratatouille would try to sort of go in the right direction, but yeah, the equating people you don't like with vermin has a long history. Yeah. So maybe don't do that, or maybe make rats cute. But of course, like then there's other things like cockroaches and mosquitoes and stuff like that people don't like, and they equate them. Like I think a term in South Africa was to equate black people with cockroaches or something.
Oh yeah,
stuff like that. And it's like you're always sort of picking the thing that like this thing that you might like is actually bad, and here let me tell you why, right? Mm-hmm. So
that's kind of a real dark side of humanity, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I wonder if can we go the other way and be like, we're all people, we're all sort of God's children. We should be nice to each other. Even if you don't know someone, you should probably be nice to them. It should be sort of your default way of doing things. We're all Canadians in Canada. Even people who don't identify as Canadian, be nice to them. Let's be nice to each other, kind of thing. Just have this as a default kind of baseline assumption. And then occasionally you run into a jerk or whatever. But I think like that sort of works kind of. I haven't been to New York City, but I hear like New York City people don't just assume the best of each other. They kind of assume other people are just sort of in their way. I don't know. Maybe that works for them though.
You know what I'd really like to do? I mean, I think I want to try and follow the calendar a little bit, because we've had all our warm up episodes, and then the first episode was like technology and its discontents. Now I don't. Yeah. We don't have to spend every bit on that, but let's try and weave it in a little bit, the technology
Yeah,
and the
let's do it.
discontents.
Yeah. Yeah, you're much better at this being organized thing than I am. So I invited Michael Garfield and he's like, yeah, totally. And then I proposed the date and he's like, yeah, that doesn't work. So
That's okay.
I'm like, oh, shoot. So we're going to have to figure out something like that. But anyway, technology and its discontents. So the basic concept is what? Technology isn't super awesome and amazing?
Yeah. And I find that I'm a technocrat, I guess, and I don't really know what that word is, but I think of
I don't
this
know that
one.
either. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was kind of there was a book called The Rise of the Technocrat, and I've never read that book, but I always liked that word and I'm just assuming that it means somebody that's, pro technology.
Oh,
right.
Well, I've got it right here. So according to Urban Dictionary, which is really the only source you need for anything, a technocrat is a person who believes in the principles of technocracy. Well, there you go. That just explains it right there. Technocracy is what it is. The next definition is a big time elitist that believes scientists, engineers, programmers, etc., should run a country.
Right.
And
so that's really interesting because if you think about the way the new world order is competing, right? Would I say it's more between the the oligarchs and the people with the money, the big corporations and these kind of things, versus the scientists who are saying, we need to go back to Hutterite colonies. And there's a bifurcation. There's a split between, I think, and we'll say it's predominantly on the left, right? And I'm making a lot of typecast sort of things, but people should understand that. So, the climate change narrative really seems to be more on the left, thanks to Al Gore. Somebody told me one time. But anyway, so you have the climate change narrative that is saying exactly that we have to have the engineers and the scientists basically we'll say in charge, right?
They'll lead us to, well, in a way, like you can put a religious coding on it and you can say they'll lead us to the promised land, right? Like if we just trust the scientists, they will use the scientific method and take us to this like utopia or whatever, which is like complete nonsense because it's not got anything to do with the scientific method, right? Like it's like there's no like values in there in terms of like we're gonna do good things for people.
It totally is the scientific method. It's like here's our educated guess, and I don't know why I'm bashing the side that I affiliate with, but here's the educated guess, right? And we're gonna lay that down, and now we're gonna try and prove ourselves wrong.
Oh yeah. Okay, I get you. Yeah, so the scientific method is great for doing science, like actual real world science, engineering instead of like physical hard science. It's probably terrible for political science.
Oh, because that falls into social sciences, which isn't really a science. But I mean, you sit down like physicist, and you gotta love the physicist, man. Like there's a new announcement from the physicists and they say, a physics girl says, we think we found something that has kind of broken science or broken physics. And then you say, oh, can you explain that? Like how do you know? And it's like, well, here's our model and here's our relative uncertainty. And here's the range of the discovery, which is a 1.8 out of 2. So that means it's not fully. It's amazing how they can classify even the certainty of the knowledge based on the discovery, on how it like varies from the standard model. And that's basically what it was, is that there was a property or an observation that they've noticed that is different from the standard model. It's outside of their models. And but it's not with enough measured certainty, right? It's only to like 6 decimal places instead of 8, right? For them to say, holy shit, we've actually, found a new particle that really challenges the whole, framework of the standard model. And I think that's fascinating, right? Like imagine a social science department with that level of, it's almost like when the periodic table I won't say is discovered. I mean, there was kind of a discovery to it, but it's the framework that they lay out, and then they start finding things, and it fills in. They fill in kind of the picture, and that to me is fascinating, right? It's amazing, but social science doesn't seem to work that way.
I think one of the challenges is really getting at the assumptions, right? Like, so the periodic table, you can kind of look at it and you go, well, why did you arrange it this way and not some other way, right? Like, why doesn't it look like a calendar? Like a calendar has 7 days in a week, and so on and so forth. And they're like, well, it's because of, electrons and orbitals and probability density clouds and blah 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 blah, whatever sort of model they're telling you. They're all lies, all the models. The actual reality is some like super complicated thing that you'd have to know quantum mechanics to understand, but it's fine. We have these like child representations of like orbitals and stuff that do a good enough job of like what you need to do in terms of like why you put the things in the periodic table the way you do and what you can expect from it. And what's amazing from it is that like I'm not clear that like that's done nearly as well in other areas, where to say like this is the way this like body of knowledge works, and here are all the underlying assumptions. And of course, if you don't agree with our conclusions, like maybe take a look at all our underlying assumptions, and it's probably one of those that you don't agree with, right? Because that would be super useful to say like, instead of like arguing, like economists do this sort of thing. Like economists would, sort of there'd be these studies that would show a certain thing that an economist didn't like, and they're like, well, it doesn't conform to like, whatever theory. It's like, well, okay, but like maybe if it doesn't conform to a theory, maybe there's something wrong with your theory. Like, and the economists like, they maybe got a little better over the years, where they with one of the good things with technocracy is maybe there's more data available. With like pricing and all kinds of other things. But I think like getting back to your first sort of thing, like the technology and its discontents, like, is it that technology is making promises that it can't ever possibly fill? Like it's saying that, hey, technology can be your best friend. Technology can be a stand-in for religion. Technology can give you a community. Technology can do all these things that like really it can't. And maybe it's really just snake oil salesmen like Silicon Valley people out there selling you on like, oh, like I don't remember the story of Facebook, but it was probably something like it's going to change the world and make it a better place kind of thing, right? There's probably like one of the things they used to pitch. Like if only everybody was online and connected, we wouldn't have wars and famine and stuff like that.
Oh, Alex, I don't know where to take that one, because I mean, there's a couple different ways. I mean, there's something called Jevons paradox. Have you heard of that?
No, what is that?
So this is basically that every advance in technology to improve the human condition and this kind of thing is eaten up basically with efficiencies, right? So I mean, one of the easiest ways that I remember this is that we get a computer, and I'm old enough, probably like you are. Like my first computer was a Commodore 64, right? And I remembered, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So now the idea is that, imagine how much work we could get done, or how much fewer hours we would have to actually work if we had something that sped up our efficiency by 10x, right?
Yeah.
But what happens is that you just end up 10xing, and then now you're 10 times more efficient, and then you 10x and you're 10 times more efficient, and you 10x and you're 10, and it never realizes in like reclaiming of like personal space or leisure time, or that's something that is still to this day only realized by a society of haves and have-nots, right? I mean, if I'm cleaning and scrubbing toilets for a living, and I consistently don't meet my monthly requirements of feeding my children because my bills are too high and my rent's too high, and on and on and on and on, then my my life is going to be vastly different than somebody that can host a leaning into stupidity podcast, right? It's like the audacity of these two fuckers that get online and waste, an hour a week just talking about silly things, when it's like, holy shit, there's people.
They should be cleaning toilets. That's what we should be doing.
Yeah, we should be like, giving the props out to the people that actually have to work for a living, right?
I don't know if you ever read the book Maid. It was about a woman who was a maid. And,
It's filmed right in my area here. My wife and
really,
they were watching it here. They're binging it a bit, catching up on a few of the series. But yeah,
cool. Have you ever seen the film? I've listened to the audiobook, but I was like blown away by just how she went through and basically just documented that even though she was, like you're saying, not like barely making enough to pay for her kid and stuff like that, all of these rich people whose homes she was cleaning, like their lives weren't that much better than hers either. And it was like fascinating to be like, like in a way, like maybe we're doing everything wrong here, but I don't know what exactly it is that would be better. Like it's kind of the idea of like standards of living have increased over the past couple hundred years. It's basically true for most of the world, absent like 700 million people or 1 billion people in Africa and parts of Asia, in South America. But and for Canada, the US, and Western Europe and Japan, like things are really, really good in terms of material satisfaction. But there's some other piece of it that's missing. And like, I don't know if there's a better framework out there than Maslow's hierarchy, because it seems like Maslow's hierarchy is a bit too simplistic. You need water and food and physical security, and then you need some sort of belonging or something. And then there's like the self-actualization stuff, which what's fascinating about this is that, like, I remember in business school, they sort of use that as a model of how to do marketing. And I think the idea was, I didn't take any courses in this because I found it morally abhorrent. The idea was to actually make people feel inadequate or something. And then that way they would spend more money. I think that was basically the idea. Like, and you see it in fashion, right? Like the people in, they get these models.
I knew you weren't a conservative. I knew it. But I knew it. You said
why?
You were because, well, that's criticism from the left, is they say that that's the MO from the conservatives, is to push them down and make them feel like shit. And, that's their condition. And that's where they, right. It's like manipulating people into it. But promising them to say, like, here's the libertarian promise. If you work hard, one day you'll be like Oprah or Michael Jordan or blah, 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 blah. Right.
Okay.
And the suffering is your fault. Yeah. It's not ours. It has nothing to do with us. It's your fault. You got to take responsibility, right? It's your fault, man. So
well, I think there is some. I'm just
going to take drugs and play video games all day because I can't compete.
Okay, so I do have an interesting argument on the video games part, but I do think there is something to the conservative critique of moral values, is that we've eroded the moral values and sold it out to capitalism or whatever, or what have you, right? And I think like. Conservatives might not say we sold out to capitalism. They'll point the finger somewhere else. But I think probably if you look at Christmas time, consumerism is probably what it is, right? So like the making people feel inadequate, like they need stuff. I think there's probably a decent place where conservatives and liberals could come together and say, like, this is not actually what we want. Like we don't actually want for ourselves or for our children or for societies to be built on like making everybody feel terrible about what they buy. And I think on the liberal side, like it's done with like environmental stuff, like really terrible environmentalists go around convincing children and other people not to use plastic straws. Just because like, I'm not quite sure why they picked that thing and not some other random thing. Like, it's just like a very bizarre thing, plastic straws to pick. It's like one of the most ineffective things you can focus on. But like, if I was somebody designing like, propaganda for oil and gas industries, maybe I would pick plastic straws, because then I can say like, well, it's your personal responsibility. You really should like not use plastic straws. And then people get it up in arms because the replacements they have for plastic straws are god awfully terrible. Like they're like the basic requirement for a plastic straw is or a straw is it needs to last for the length of the drink. And maybe that's 5 minutes, maybe that's an hour. A plastic straw lasts for basically the rest of time or something like that.
Yeah.
And the replacements, the paper straws, last for roughly 12 seconds. So you need something in the middle there, like maybe a hybrid paper plastic straw, which lasts for like 2 days. And that like most people are going to finish their drink in 2 days, and you throw it in the landfill and the thing, I don't know, biodegrades or some nonsense. Technocracy again. Yes, we just need a technical solution to this problem. But I think that's kind of the
no straws, right? Because I feel that there's
a strawless world. How did that work? What did they do back in the Middle Ages when they had straws? It was terrible back then.
Now, Alex, that's my straw man argument.
Oh, well done. There you go. Now we need to find a steel man argument. Steel straws, they're a thing.
They are.
My daughter some of those for Christmas.
Oh shit! Yeah. So she loses them.
They're not as they're not as completely crazy as I thought. Like I was like, this seems weird. You can put it in the dishwasher. Basically, it works. That sort of thing. But yeah, to your point, though, I think there's sort of the straw man caricature of the conservative, which I'm happy to play every now and then. I'm probably not that good at it because I probably don't believe in like 100% of things that conservatives believe in. Also because conservatives are actually quite nuanced. I know that sounds crazy to a liberal person, but also liberals and the NDP people and all those communists and stuff like are somewhat nuanced too. Like there's certain things they believe in.
Well, but that's the thing I think I told you last time is that I take a liberal position because it's the harder argument to have, right? I mean,
okay.
I was a young conservative.
Let's try this. Let's try switching. I'll try taking the liberal position. You try taking the conservative position. Maybe you're just like really good at arguing. Okay. Maybe that's what it is.
Not really.
Okay. So what do we want to talk about?
Well, what can we talk about? Well, let's kind of elaborate on technology and its discontent. Mm-hmm. So if you're framing it from a conservative position, it depends how far back you want to. Like, where are the conservative values? By the way, we're having renovations, so that might be why there's.
There you go. It's symbolic. It's conservatism knocking on your door. It's like come back to the past, because conservatism in sort of the classic sense is all about stop. We can't have more progress, which I think is extremely weird because like in Ontario, at least they put the label progressive with the label conservative. And like Thatcher criticized the progressive conservatives for being too progressive and not conservative enough. So like, and you're out there in BC, which like doesn't even have a conservative party, just has the BC Liberals versus the the NDP.
Well, we're tree huggers out here, right? So
yeah. Well, so your most conservative person in BC would be a member. Well, not necessarily.
Would be a Liberal Party member, right? Probably.
Will be a Liberal Party member unless they join some like completely ineffective like third party that basically got 0% of the vote, which people do, but like that's more like just people not knowing that like
there actually is a conservative party out here. But I mean, the thing is that I think the idea from a conservative, the thing about like the GOP, right, the Good Old Boys Club, and to me this is now it may have it's changed over the years, but to me. A conservative party is something like a Protestant work ethic, the grandpa's like position of like go be a man, go do your job, don't be silly and blow your money on stupid things, take care of your family, these kinds of things. Returning to that, right? Yeah. Whereas the lunacy of the left is the left coming in going, okay, I got an idea. Let's spend it on this. And then you're like, that's probably not a good idea.
I think the
sensible
the part of So the one of the differences between liberal and conservative is I think the liberals have more trust in the government. Is they believe that the government can actually do things and do useful things and be helpful in people's lives. And conservatives basically don't really trust the government unless it has a badge or a gun. If the government is the police or the military, conservatives trust them. Yeah, 100%, no problem. But if it's like some other thing, then they're like,
you're using trust and maybe respect, right? Mm-hmm. That's probably the approach. We
Oh, I
respect law
see.
and order,
Yes.
right? As opposed to,
Yes.
I trust them. Well,
Yeah.
you know, I
You'll
respect the
follow.
rules.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a great conservative quote about some conservative in Canada saying that, you know, they want like a government, or they want whatever, that they want people to respect authority, but just not liberal authority. I thought that explained it really, really well. That authority is good for a conservative unless it's like based on liberal principles, which was like, yeah, that explains the sort of conservative position. We're basically fine with like a lot of things, so long as they're not like liberal stuff, right? Which is kind of like you just set yourself up in opposition to something else, which it's kind of fascinating. It's also sort of like a bit idiotic in terms of if you actually wanted to do something, you'd be like, well, what does your party stand for? Well, I don't know. What does your party stand for? And we'll just go against what you guys say. Like that seems idiotic, right? Like what like Coca-Cola doesn't go out there and like be like, hey, we're not Pepsi. Pepsi, on the other hand, does, and they suck. I don't know if you remember that Super Bowl thing with Steve Carell. They're like, you know, is Pepsi okay? Like they build a whole Super Bowl campaign around, is Pepsi okay? It was like, yes, Pepsi sucks as a drink. Like, do you have to remind everybody of that and pay money as Pepsi to do that? Like, I don't understand how like Pepsi, survives. It's obviously terrible.
I don't know. My dad
objectively, I think when you the Pepsi challenge, they have to chill the Pepsi and serve the Coke warm. And then even then, most people are sort of like on the fence, like, well, I'm not sure, but anyway, I'm a big proponent of Coca-Cola. I think they're great. We should get some sponsorship for them. Maybe, that'd be an idea, but I like it as an example of like complicated ideas simplified. Like, Coke reminds you need their product on a regular basis, which is smart, because like you might forget that you need, sugar water that will, rot your teeth and do terrible things to your insides. Because otherwise, like, how would you know that that's what you need? How would you remember that that has something to do with Christmas if they didn't constantly remind you of that?
Yeah.
So the same sort of thing with like political stuff is the conservatives have to keep reminding you that like they are the party of, I don't know, conservative values of like, family and all those other good things. And the liberals just like, want the government to do everything. I think that's the.
Well, I brought.
Is that be an accurate caricature?
I think so. I mean, yeah, I think so. And I tried to remind. Have you seen my series with Steve Keen, The Economist?
No, I saw a little bit of it. Was it modern MMT? What's that called? Modern.
Yeah, modern monetary policy.
Yeah, was it that?
How's that banging? Is it really loud?
Yeah, a little bit, but it's good. It gives some character to what's going on here. Yeah.
So I tried to explain to him as I network with more liberal types of thinkers, I remind them of that, and it almost seems to catch them off guard a bit. Like, what do you mean we need an organic, market-driven approach to something that is a solution to a problem that we have? Right? Like, what?
Why? Yeah. What do they think we need?
Well, they'll come up with the idea, and then they'll say, well, this is an idea that I have, and I think it should be done this way. And so you think, well, what does that mean to say this is how it should be done? It means that in order for that idea to become a reality, it needs some sort of enforcement or government.
Right.
Like, you got to think, how do you get people to do something? Right? It's like, okay, I have a mathematical model. I've proven it. Okay. So has it changed anybody's behavior? Has it, right? And so, well, let's make it a law. Whoa. Okay, that's not a good idea. So how are we going to get people to buy into it? Well, I don't know. And I say, what if you're like naturally a leader? What? What do you mean? Oh, go start a business and see how many people buy your product. And they go, what? I'm like, yeah, we've got a free market. If that's a good idea, go take it to market and see if it sells.
Right.
And their eyes are like, what?
Yeah.
why don't we just create a law or a policy, or better yet, a think tank, and create an organization, or this kind of bullshit. And I'm thinking, I know, because I'm an entrepreneur, I know that ideas are a dime a dozen.
Yeah.
Go and try and make it scalable. Go and try and make it so somebody wants to buy what you're selling. That's difficult.
Yeah, there's this area called implementation science that somebody mentioned. I thought it was a good concept to say, like, it's not really about coming up with the idea. It's more about implementing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's like what I like about the kind of sort of more entrepreneurial approach. I think there's an important split within sort of conservatism, and probably also liberalism as well, is the separation between sort of the entrepreneurial sort of like go out and try stuff, talk to customers thing, versus the corporate sort of innovation, which is kind of like it's very much focused inward, right? If you have a small organization where you're an entrepreneur, you have like maybe a handful of people you work with, most of the time you're going to be focused on the outside of your organization, because otherwise it's just you in a room talking to like all the other people you work with, and like none of them are customers or investors or suppliers or anything else. And it's like you're not really making any progress there. Versus you get a bigger company where you have some of these large behemoths, and like most of the time is spent looking inward and talking to each other. Or when they interact with the outside world, it's not an actual sort of two-way conversation. They'll go out and be like extracting information from customers, or trying to squeeze suppliers or whatever, right? And I think that's an important difference. And I don't know at what point that flips, like at what size of a company gets that it goes from being outward focused to inward focused. But I think that's a really useful way of sort of understanding some of the split, even within conservatives, because there's some conservatives who love big things, like big companies. I think big companies are generally terrible, like any other big institution, such as government. So I don't, I'm not like a full libertarian or anything. So I do realize you do need like just individuals on their own are pretty powerless. And you do need some sense of, a bit of a community kind of size thing. But yet again, you can't just like necessarily just pay everybody the same. So you do need like, a kind of like, what was it Marx's thing, from each according to their ability, from each to each according to their need, like with some like actual proper like blockchain or some sort of whiz bang technology, you could actually do like to each according to their ability, which like, isn't like based on need, it's based on an ability, which is kind of like maybe what you actually want in a market economy, is to reward people for what they do. And then some people, if they just don't have any marketable skills, whatsoever, it's kind of like, well, maybe there should be some focus on helping getting people get marketable skills. You could call that an education system, or maybe there's some people who just simply will never have marketable skills for whatever reason. They were in an industry that sort of went away or whatever. And then like, okay, maybe there's something where it's like, we do want people in society to not starve. So, there's some kind of role for like redistributing some, somewhat to people. And we do that with like old people. We have, old age security and things like that. And I don't imagine a lot of conservatives would be, eager to tear down stuff for old people. Old people tend to be pretty reliable conservative voters. So like, saying like we should, the government shouldn't be there to help people or whatever is kind of a dumb sort of thing to say from like a political science point of view, in terms of like, well, one of the biggest programs out there helps old people. So maybe we'll keep that one in place just for like sheer like getting elected sort of purposes. But I think there's something to the like a lot of what's happened. So I was talking to somebody about the music industry. So he's got something that he's trying to get out there, and it's supposed to help artists. So the artists retain ownership of their own work. He currently helps them get into movies and things like that. So if you're doing a movie and you need some music for it, he's got some sort of network, and he's got some sort of system where he can kind of go through and filter through who he knows and like be able to find somebody. You're creating a movie and you want certain characteristics for it, or if you're doing a TV show, and I think he mentioned something about a food truck in like New Orleans or whatever. So you want the music to be all New Orleans sort of bands or whatever. So stuff like that, where like his suggestion was there's a lot that the music industry, the sort of, the distribution and marketing part takes, and a lot of the value is actually created by the artist. And then, the consumer themselves, the music enthusiast, also wants to be able to sort of engage with this stuff. So I think there's something there that could be done. I'm trying to hook him up with some people who do some blockchain stuff, because I think that's probably a technology that would helpfully sort of bridge the gap. With some of the discovery thing, I'm really, really curious about like this idea of like, if we didn't use Google for so many things, how else would we find things? Because like if you had to actually rely on actual people and you couldn't go through Google, the results might be slightly better. And like social media taps into this in a little bit, that people will go and they'll like post something. Like as I'm on this WhatsApp group for like entrepreneurs in Kigali, Rwanda, and somebody was there and they posted something they were looking for, and right away a few people replied to them with like, "Oh, hey, yeah, I can connect you with somebody," which I think is fascinating. I think there's something to the like just working with other people is maybe superior to like leaving stuff up to like technocracy.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I call it the Google Oracle. I'm a real fan of Google for many reasons, for my business and various different aspects. I had to get a special approval from Google to get I don't know how to really explain it. There's a certain algorithm that I use from the schema of a search result. I don't know if we've talked about this before, but when you search on Google, there's the SERP, which shows up on the right-hand side of a Google home page, right? So if you search for Max Planck, for example, on the right-hand side, it's going to have pictures of him, and then it's going to have his books, his education. And at the bottom, there's something called people also search for. And so I developed this, I leveraged that piece of information, the people also search for field, within the schema and the search results that Google puts up. And I had to get special approval from them, because I've put it into a product within my publishing company, right? And so I had to approach them, and they came back and they said, "Yeah, no, we're okay with that. We just don't want you to say that you're affiliated with us." Basically, that sounds funny, but just not saying this is like a Google endorsed product. But they said, "That's fine." Yeah. So it was actually a really interesting day. I was like, "Oh, that's cool," because I kind of got the thumbs up to say, "Sure, have at her," but just don't say that we've endorsed it in any way. Yeah, exactly. So,
but they could reverse that decision at any moment if they wanted, right?
Yeah, but I think, and I guess the legal approach does have some recourse just by the way we actually use language. So, like, what is theirs to give? Out of good faith, I'd asked, "Hey, is there any issue here?" And they said, no, not really. You just don't use it. So for them to then, they've provided like a chain of correspondence, which shows attention and shows.
Right. I'm thinking more on the technocratic level, which is like if you're using this in what you're doing, and then all of a sudden it stops working. Like if you built this into a product in such a way that like, you're making use of it and it stops working, there's maybe not a lot you can do, because you're sort of
exactly.
Yeah. Because and it's interesting, because this is the same challenge that somebody told me about in East Africa, in Kenya, where you have this M-Pesa, which is like mobile money. And it was like this first version that came out like maybe like 10, 15 years ago. And so it's like the Safaricom, the telecom company, makes it available. And the person was saying like, it actually has really high transaction costs. I'm like, oh, and he said like, well, a lot of people have tried to design something else, but what happens is that once M-Pesa like finds out what they're doing, all of a sudden their API calls to M-Pesa just magically stop working. And so it's this kind of like you're right, there is legal recourse if somebody was to send you a cease and desist, but if they just like your thing doesn't work anymore, you can't even argue that they did anything. because, like, what are you going to say? Oh, it's not working. And then it's like, oh, well, did you like maybe forget to like did you enter your password incorrectly or something?
Yeah. So Alex, I'm a fan of Google. I think for the most part, they're really good. There's my entire business is held within their Google platform, the G Suite.
Oh, wow.
So I like the way it integrates. But what I would say is that, for the most part, it's hard because they're such a big, massive company. And I think that the objection from the public mainly is that they're such a big company. They're such a dominating force, and that makes people nervous.
Yeah, I think they become basically a government, right? Like that's what happens with a lot of these big tech. And I think that's why conservatives in the United States have sort of taken issue with big tech is essentially running governments. And they have like, all the critiques conservatives usually have of governments. Plus there's also the like zero accountability, where like normally a government will do things and at least there's some accountability somewhere. You could always vote the bums out kind of thing.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But like if it's not like, and what you're using Google for, makes a lot of sense. And a lot of people build things on top of Facebook and everything else. And then, if at some point things stop working or whatever, they're kind of like a bit sort of on their own where they're sort of just trying to make sense of it. Yeah. So so I talked to a lot of people who like they are doing interesting innovation, and it is around sort of Web3 and blockchain. And I think some of it is really coming up with infrastructure that isn't so centralized. So like if you can do something and you're not dependent on sort of one of these, big tech companies, then maybe you do have, there is maybe a lot more, I guess the analogy would kind of be like Linux, right? Is like, Linux came out and there's a lot that had to be done to make it functional to be used widely. But then once that, happened, then it became much more reliable because you could see what was going on as opposed to running off like a Microsoft platform, or some other proprietary, there's a lot of proprietary Unix things like AIX and HPUX and things like that. And like you wouldn't necessarily be able to dig too far into it because there's, you can't, right? Like a lot of it's proprietary, right? So I think that's where I could see potentially these big tech companies not necessarily going away, but there being sort of a parallel model where it's like, well, if you like what they do, you can use them, no problem, right? And things will work. But if for whatever reason it's not working for you, then there's this other sort of parallel infrastructure. It's tricky though, because like I think Trump, he was kicked off Twitter. And then he went on what, Parler or something? Parlay? Was it? It had a French name. That sounds terrible.
Probably Parlay if it's French. Yeah.
Is that what it? Because if it's for conservatives, having a French name sounds terrible, right? Like, conservatives in the States don't have a good view of France, right? Maybe you should call it something else. But anyway, but it's interesting because those network effects are fascinating, right? Like there's a lot of areas where you see the network effects come out. And I think that whole technocracy thing is based on, like if the network effects weren't so strong, maybe the technocracy thing wouldn't be such a big issue. But because they are, somebody sort of sets a standard in place and other people, it's really hard not to follow it. Like I don't use Facebook. And there's a lot of things that like people will only post on Facebook. And so I'm like, okay, well, if I, if you want to let me know about this thing, like, do you have a non-Facebook version of it? And it's actually weirdly successful in getting people to like post things more than just on Facebook.
Yeah. No, I don't know where to go with this. I would say, we're kind of coming to the top of the hour, but I have I think I've told you before about my book, Will Freeman, right?
No, wait.
So I have a literary fiction called Will Freeman, and it's about artificial intelligence. Like I said, it's a literary fiction. And
I think you did mention this. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so is it relevant to the conversation about technology? Absolutely. Because early on in this, in today's recording, you'd mentioned about taking an idea and then kind of flipping it to the other side. Now, your use of that went to somewhere dark, I think, when we're talking about eating animals and stuff. But I think it's worthwhile, almost like a Stoic, Jedi mind trick, right? Okay. And so what I had done with this novel is I said, imagine the world was coming to an end. I mean, hey, don't look up, right? But
don't
you have
up,
this,
yes.
yeah. But you have this. We have the dominating narrative, especially around AI research, that I think seems to be around kind of protecting what it means to be human, and we're building this philosophy, right? We're constructing this psychology based out of fear because I think we've been culturally bombarded with movies like Terminator, right? Like the AI is going to come in and just take over, right? It's like it's going to dominate our existence, right? And in some sort of abstract ways, it kind of already has. Yeah. But as a thinking machine, it's these movies strike that chord of fear that we're no longer on the top of the human the food, or on top of the food chain, right? So the premise of the book was that we know 100%. There's not a division between whether or not the world's heading towards disaster. We know that there's a finite end, and it's clearly in sight. And so I want you to just meditate for that on that. Think about that for a minute and think, if society really thought and knew unequivocally that, the date was going to be, say, 2082. And then what we're thinking about in terms of what we're developing, how we're moving forward with technology would instantly change. We would think, more or less, it would be like spending time with loved ones, but also in terms of legacy, right? You'd think, if we're going to do anything to try and put artificial intelligence out there, we would want to do it in a way that, and if we were going to replicate it, something human, what would we put into this human? How would we create this human to as closely match the human experience and condition and all the good things that it means to be human? So that was what the novel was about. And cool. And so what it instantly did is it did that Jedi mind trick that you did earlier. It said, let's take everything off the table, but we'll set the conditions in the book in such a way that people think, oh, okay, I can imagine that. And now, oh, okay, of course we would want this entity to feel, to love, to to embody the wisdom of society, right? And so that's what the story is about. It's about the human condition. It's about artificial intelligence, and it's in many cases, to kind of move towards a wrap up here. It's like it's an embodiment of what it means to be human, but it's also embracing technology in a way that maybe somewhat resembles a Nietzsche sort of like Übermensch, this like move to the next evolutionary advancement of humankind, right? So it's
that's an interesting way. Like, if you said that the world was going to end in 2082, one, it's not caused by AI, right? It's some other thing, like a comet. Don't look up. That's what's going to do it. I think Halley's Comet comes 6 years before that, maybe, but whatever, something like that in that realm. And then, there's nothing we can do to stop it, right? So it's not AI, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. Then, I see how, like, if you start with those assumptions, you come to the conclusion with, like, if we wanted to create a legacy, what would that be? And the legacy could be, we just like try to broadcast or send stuff out to the rest of like the universe. But like, that's only going to get so far, whereas you probably want something that'll replicate. And that's where creating this, sort of AI human, this I don't know, robot, some sort, or maybe you'd try to get people off the planet. Like, you'd be like, well, we know we have a certain amount of time, we can get like 100,000 people off the planet and send them somewhere. But yet, I guess that's kind of the, like, Yeah, I get what you're saying, is that if you start with the premise, then it becomes like, instead of running away from technology, your only option is to embrace technology.
To its
If you
full
do
sort of
care,
thing. It's like,
if you care about the legacy, because
the
you could just say,
right? Yeah.
well, we're willing to accept that this is the end, and like, humanity will just disappear and nobody will remember us. But that, I think, seems potentially very difficult for people to accept. Like, for themselves, they can accept, like, okay, I'm going to pass away one day, and then, my legacy is maybe my children or whatever, or maybe I don't really care. Maybe I'm just happy to have been here and had the experience that I had or whatever. But to think like, the works of Shakespeare and stuff like that are like basically going to disappear, and that's it. It's a bit, I think that sort of tears at sort of that something in our soul to say, like, yeah, there's this amazing stuff that, there's lots of terrible things humans have done, but there's also these amazing things, and we want somebody to sort of be our ambassador to kind of take that forward. Yeah, I think that's interesting. It does flip it around. It does turn it into instead of running away from technology and fear, let's, sort of embrace technology. Yeah, that is very cool. Yeah, I'm super interested in the discontent side now. I'm really curious now that we've nailed down the why we should all embrace technology. Maybe next week we nail down the, like, what could possibly go wrong with technology.
Well, yeah, and the podcast episode. So you'll see the next one we have Dan Cola and Beta. So we're screwing around with that, but the idea of the reason why they rotated from alpha beta is that you're absolutely right. We can continue episode 2 in a further discussion on the discontents, right? Or we can get into something new. But the third episode, which will go into violence, Trump, and the space between, I'm actually excited to talk about, because we're on the anniversary of the storming of the Capitol, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's tomorrow. Yeah.
Right. So I guess 2 weeks from now we'll talk a little bit. That'll be the Trump episode. I have a call into Trump and see if he'll show. He hasn't called me back yet.
No. Okay.
But who knows? We might have a surprise guest. Who knows? He might show up.
There you go. Maybe he'll be president again by then. Who knows? Anything can happen.
Who knows, right?
There you go. Yeah, it sounds like that construction's really happening.
They're just we're leaning into it, man. Like,
there you go.
It's like Alex phones me and says, we got a recording today. And I said, what? You got a recording today? What? What? You want to still record? Hell yeah, let's do it.
Hell yeah. There you go. Embrace the stupidity. Yeah, the other thing I'd like to say, we should talk about this at some point, is the artificial general intelligence. I did that sort of, reverse things operator on that to come up with natural specific stupidity as like just a thing I embrace. Really? Yeah. I'll have to talk about it. I gotta go, but we should talk about how stupidity actually helps with being natural, being very specific, and being very stupid actually helps you to perhaps understand things well, and maybe even connect with people well, which is very human.
Columbo, you know that guy, Columbo, that detective?
Yes, Gene Vellinger, who is an amazing recovering systems thinker and storyteller. That's the example he uses for, like, instead of trying to prove to people about all your systems thinking maps with all your arrows and this, that, just go all in on Columbo. Yeah. So we should definitely talk. We should talk about that, and like you apply the Columbo technique to some of the things we're going to talk about.
You got it, man. Okay.
Yeah.
Until next
week.
Right. Thank
See
you.
you next week. Yeah.
Bye.
Take care.